When Niagara Falls went quiet 3 days ago, the first people to notice weren't scientists. They were tourists. Standing at the observation deck on the Canadian side, phones out, expecting the thundering wall of water they'd seen in every photo, every movie, every postcard. Instead, silence. A trickle. Wet rock faces where 6 million cubic feet of water per minute used to cascade. Park staff thought it was a sensor malfunction. The local news thought it was a prank. But when the USGS confirmed the flow readings, the room went very, very quiet. Because the numbers said something that shouldn't be possible. Niagara Falls, one of the most powerful waterfalls on the planet, had effectively stopped flowing, and nobody could explain why. Now, let me walk you through the first few hours, because the initial response tells you everything about how bizarre this is. When flow readings at the Niagara River gauging station dropped below 10% of normal, the immediate assumption was an upstream event. Makes sense, right? The Niagara River is fed by Lake Erie. It's basically the drain plug for 4 of the 5 Great Lakes, so the first call went to the Army Corps of Engineers station at Buffalo. Their answer: Lake Erie levels are normal. Outflow from the lake is normal. The water is leaving Lake Erie exactly the way it's supposed to. So then the question became, if the water's entering the river, where's it going before it reaches the falls? They checked for ice jams. Nothing. It's not winter. They checked the upstream control structures at the International Control Dam, the gates that regulate how much water goes over the falls versus into the hydroelectric tunnels. Everything was set to standard flow configuration. They checked for a landslide or rockfall that might have dammed the river upstream. Helicopters went up, drones went out. Nothing. The riverbed upstream of the falls was intact. The water was flowing into the upper Niagara River just fine. But somewhere between Lake Erie and the brink of the falls, along a stretch of roughly 36 miles, a massive volume of water was simply vanishing. And that's when the investigation shifted underground. Here's where I need you to understand something about the geology of the Niagara region, because it's the key to everything. The Niagara Gorge, that massive canyon the falls have been carving for 12,000 years, sits on top of layered sedimentary rock. You've got hard dolomite limestone on top, softer shale underneath. That's actually why the falls exist in the first place. The water erodes the soft shale, the hard caprock overhangs, eventually breaks off, and the falls slowly retreat upstream. They've moved about 7 miles in the last 12,000 years. But here's the thing nobody was paying close enough attention to. That soft shale layer, it doesn't just erode from above. Water finds its way into every crack, every joint, every fissure. And over thousands of years, those pathways can widen. They can connect. They can form networks. When USGS hydrologists deployed ground-penetrating radar along a 6-mile stretch of the upper river last week, what came back on the imaging stopped them cold. Roughly 200 feet below the riverbed, the radar showed a void. Not a small cavity, not a minor karst pocket. A cavern system stretching an estimated 400 meters laterally and dropping at least another 150 feet below the initial void. Dr. Marcus Chen, a geomorphologist with the USGS Geology, Minerals, Energy, and Geophysics Science Center, described it as, and I'm quoting directly here, a subterranean drainage capture on a scale we have not previously documented in this geological province. In plain English, the river found a hole, a massive one, and it's draining through the bedrock instead of flowing over the falls. Now, you're probably thinking, how does a hole that big just appear? And that's the right question. It didn't appear overnight. Geologists at the University at Buffalo, who've been studying Niagara Gorge stratigraphy for decades, believe this cavern system has been developing for centuries, maybe longer. The soft Rochester Shale and Queenston Shale layers beneath the dolomite caprock are particularly vulnerable to dissolution. That's the chemical process where slightly acidic groundwater slowly eats away at the rock. Dr. Patricia Wolford, chair of the geology department at UB, told reporters that her team had actually flagged anomalous groundwater readings in the region as far back as 2019. Minor stuff at the time, slightly elevated flow rates in monitoring wells, small sinkholes appearing in farm fields a few miles from the gorge. Nobody connected the dots. Why would they? Niagara Falls felt permanent. It felt like the one thing that couldn't change. But here's the part that genuinely shook me when I started digging into the data. This isn't the first time Niagara Falls has stopped. On March 29, 1848, residents of the town of Niagara Falls woke up to an eerie silence. The falls had gone dry. People walked out onto the exposed riverbed and picked up artifacts, old weapons, fossils. It lasted nearly 30 hours before the flow resumed. The cause? A massive ice jam at the mouth of Lake Erie had physically blocked the water from entering the river. Then, in 1969, the US Army Corps of Engineers intentionally diverted the American Falls, the smaller of the two cataracts, by building a temporary cofferdam. They wanted to study the rock face and assess whether the talus buildup at the base could be removed. For 5 months, the American Falls were dry. So yes, it stopped before. But in both cases, the cause was on the surface. Visible. Understandable. What's happening now is fundamentally different. The water isn't being blocked from entering the river. It's being swallowed from below. And that distinction matters enormously, because it means the solution isn't as simple as removing a dam or waiting for ice to melt. Let me talk about what this means for people. Because the geological mystery is fascinating, but there are real lives wrapped up in this. The Niagara Falls metropolitan area, both the American and Canadian sides, is home to roughly 250,000 people. Tourism alone generates an estimated $14 billion annually across both nations. Over 30 million visitors come to see the falls every year. Hotels, restaurants, tour operators, boat companies, souvenir shops, entire communities are economically tethered to that water flowing. Right now, hotel cancellations in Niagara Falls, Ontario, have spiked by 68% in the last 72 hours, according to the Niagara Falls Tourism Board. On the American side, the Maid of the Mist, which has been operating since 1846, has suspended operations for the first time outside of its normal seasonal closure. Small business owners are already feeling it. Tony Marchetti runs a family restaurant on Old Falls Street. He told a Buffalo News reporter, "We had a full reservation book for the next 3 weeks. Half of them canceled in one day. People aren't coming to see dry rocks. And that's just tourism." Here's where the dominoes start falling harder. The Niagara River powers 2 of the largest hydroelectric facilities in North America. The Robert Moses Niagara Power Plant on the US side and the Sir Adam Beck Complex on the Canadian side. Combined, they generate over 4.5 gigawatts of capacity, 8 million homes. The New York Power Authority has already reported a 24% drop in output from Moses Lewiston and has activated emergency power purchase agreements with neighboring grid operators. Ontario Power Generation has issued a similar alert. If flow doesn't resume, both plants could go to minimal generation within weeks, and that energy shortfall would ripple across the northeastern grid during peak demand season. But the biggest concern, the one that keeps geologists up at night right now, isn't economics. It's the structural integrity of the gorge itself. If that underground cavern system is still expanding, if water is actively widening the void through erosion and dissolution, there's a scenario nobody wants to talk about publicly, but that I've seen referenced in at least 2 internal USGS communications. A large-scale subsurface collapse. A sinkhole event. Not a pothole in somebody's backyard. A potential collapse of a section of the Niagara Gorge Wall. The rock that millions of tourists stand on. The rock that holds the observation platforms, the walkways, the buildings along the gorge rim. Dr. Chen's team has rated the probability as low but non-negligible, which in scientific language means they can't rule it out. And that alone is enough to trigger precautionary evacuations if the data trends in the wrong direction. So what's being done right now? The response has been fast, and it's been international, which tells you how seriously both governments are taking this. The International Joint Commission, that's the US-Canadian body that governs shared waterways, activated its emergency protocol for the first time since its creation. A joint geological assessment team is on-site drilling borehole arrays along the upper river to map the full extent of the cavern system, They're dropping hydrophones, underwater microphones, into monitoring wells to listen for active water movement underground. The idea is to build a three-dimensional model of where the water is going and how fast the void is growing. On the engineering side, there's early discussion of a grout injection program, essentially pumping concrete and chemical sealant into the subsurface to plug the drainage pathways. But that's months away at minimum, and it assumes they can identify the primary channels. You can't plug what you can't find. Meanwhile, the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation has issued a precautionary advisory for communities downstream of the falls that rely on the lower Niagara River for municipal water supply. Flow in the lower river has dropped by over 70%, and water treatment plants in Lewiston and Youngstown are operating on reduced intake. Canadian authorities in the Niagara region have activated backup groundwater systems for municipalities on their side. Now, I want to be clear about something. There's a lot of speculation flying around online right now. Feriki, everything from government conspiracies to underground volcanic activity. The actual science points to a natural geological process that's been happening for a very long time, that crossed a critical threshold, and that caught everyone off guard because we weren't monitoring it. That's not a cover-up. That's a blind spot, and it's a blind spot that exists at hundreds of other geological sites around the world, where we assume permanence because something has looked the same within our lifetime. If you live in the Niagara region, here's what authorities are recommending. Stay informed through official channels, the USGS, the International Joint Commission, and your local municipality's emergency management page. If you're near the gorge rim, respect any new barriers or closures that go up, even if they seem overly cautious. And if you rely on Niagara River water for your home supply, now is the time to identify your backup, whether that's stored water, a delivery service, or a connection to an alternate municipal system. I'll be following this story as it develops. In the next video, I'm going to break down the full geology of the Niagara Gorge, how it formed, why it's more fragile than it looks, and what the historical record tells us about collapse events in similar formations around the world. Make sure you're subscribed so you catch that when it drops. And if you found this breakdown useful, hit the like button. It tells me you want more deep dives like this.